As always, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for watching us. Well, why have you received higher energy bills and what to do about them? But first, the big stories of the week, back after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, I'll tell you, it has been a wild week in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, which returned. They are in special session that is now concluded. We'll see where it all goes. Well, let's first of all talk about what happened this past week in the Pennsylvania House. Joining me to talk about that is Stephen Caruso. He's Capitol reporter with Spotlight PA, and Tom Lehman. He's the Capitol reporter with WGAL News 8. Tom, I'll start with you. It was a wild affair. I don't know how you all kept it straight, because those of us who are on the outside watching it were confused a good bit of the time about what was. So what's the big happening?
Well, Terry, lawmakers in the House finally came back to session after gaveling out in January.
Right.
This was the first time we had the full complement of lawmakers, and it was the first time we had this newfound Democratic majority, 102 to 101. And that includes Speaker Mark Rozzi, who voted alongside with the Democrats.
Right.
And they flexed that majority. They passed rules on that first day of the special session.
Otherwise, they couldn't even meet, right?
Mm-hmm. And that was sort of the big stumbling block. That was what everybody was waiting to see happen. It did happen. Those rules were passed. They began advancing legislation involving child sex abuse lawsuits,
right.
And the chamber is beginning to function again.
Yeah, but let me make this point, Stephen. You got 102 to 101. I think there were two Republicans who were out. So in any given session day, you could have several members who aren't in the chamber, making it almost impossible for the majority to function. The minority could be the majority on any given day, correct?
Yeah, and so I think that's why, Democrats, we don't have rules for normal session. Like right now, all we're dealing with is this one issue of child sexual abuse, which has a long history in the Capitol of not getting done. This is a chance for abuse survivors to sue for about 2 years their
right.
abuser. But we're going to eventually get into regular session where they're going to have to pass a budget. Maybe they'll look at a minimum wage increase. Maybe they'll look at LGBTQ non-discrimination. And yeah, in those situations, Democrats are going to need perfect attendance, or they're going to need rules that let them have people vote from outside the Capitol, which we saw during the pandemic. Those were stripped away by Republicans at the last minute last year. So like the rules for next session or for the coming normal session are sort of what we really have to look for, because that's going to tell us like how are they going to govern.
That's a good point. The other aspect is the Senate is Republican, the House is Democratic, at least nominally, I'll say Democratic. And that creates another problem in and of itself, correct?
Sure. I mean, the House can send over whatever legislation it wants under a Democratic leadership, let's say, but that doesn't mean that it's going to get passed in the Senate. And on the other hand here, you have legislation over in the Senate that might get passed by a Republican Senate and heads to the House and
go nowhere.
Yeah, the leadership there may just not advance it. So I think, to Stephen's point earlier, the attendance issue. I know at one point they were looking for lawmakers potentially being in the building at one point. I would say that's going to be a tricky issue with both chambers. The legislation that passes between both of them.
Well, and that's like also why we're even in special session is Republicans in the Senate combined this childhood sexual abuse issue with voter ID and a regulatory bill or amendment and put them all in one bill and sent it over to the House and said, this is our offer.
Yeah.
And Speaker Mark Rozzi said, I'm not combining them.
All right, let's talk about the voter ID law. Basically, what Republicans want is to have a voter produce identification every single time he or she votes, as compared to the first time you vote, and right. Democrats are opposed to that.
I think generally speaking, yes.
Right.
And what Republicans did, they wanted this passed as a constitutional amendment. They wanted it on the ballot in May. They attached it to a package of constitutional amendments, which included the childhood sex abuse lawsuit legislation, that constitutional amendment.
Right.
And as a result, the House under Mark Rozzi, the Speaker of the House, basically said, no, we're not going to pass that. We want to pass a clean bill, and we'll wait until we have our full complement of members.
All right, break time. When we come back, we'll continue with the special session. Maybe we'll even get to talk about what they might do after the special session is now over. We'll see what happens. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, we're going to continue with the House special session, and then we got to talk about Governor Shapiro and what's going on in his new administration. Well, let's go to voter ID.
Yeah, I think the thing with voter ID is that, Republicans have made clear they want it. And that's a starting point for Republicans on any sort of election reform. And Pennsylvania needs election reform. We have Act 77, which allows for mail-in voting, but there are holes in it. There's the issue of what to do with undated mail-in ballots. There's drop boxes. Right. There's a lot of things that Republicans want to sort of address in there. And Democrats want to see, automatic voter registration or same-day voter registration. So there's a lot of pieces on the table.
That's generally benefited the Democrats, correct?
Yeah, and they would also say it's good for all voters. Republicans are going to say we need election integrity. There's a whole lot to be done on election reform. I think Republicans have been clear their starting price is voter ID, and then what happens from there is sort of the big question. Josh Shapiro, for instance, has said that he hasn't closed the door on it entirely. He's basically been like, I need to look at the deal. I just want to know that people are negotiating in good faith, and then maybe we can talk from there. So, Democrats have been a little skeptical of voter ID in the past, but we've even seen Stacey Abrams nationally say, maybe we can vote for this. So I think the specifics of the deal matter a lot on voting.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Josh Shapiro. He seems to be here, there, and everywhere, and a very, very aggressive first, 6 weeks, 5-6 weeks in office?
Sure, and then beyond the legislative and policy aspect of it, he was out in southwestern PA at the site of the train crash that happened recently. And the big development there is that he has asked the state's law enforcement department, his former department, the Attorney General, to look into this as a potential criminal matter, which shows you that he wants to hold Norfolk Southern accountable here, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops in the coming weeks, as we've seen all this outrage over the train derailment there and the release of that gas that caused the explosion.
Yeah. Well, one of the keys, of course, is the governor's budget message, and that often that will tell you where he wants to go, and we would expect that Shapiro will recommend increases in education, both basic education as well as higher education. Yeah, we haven't heard any specifics from the Shapiro admin yet, but there was that court ruling that said Pennsylvania's school funding was inequitable for poorer districts. So there is this sort of mandate on the table that the state needs to find a way to reform its education. Funding is to be part of that, but Republicans have been pushing, no, we need to expand the amount of charter schools, we expand private schooling as well. Shapiro has indicated some interest or some openness to that on the campaign trail as part of his very broad-based campaign effort. But we'll start to see some of the details of that and everything else Shapiro is going to want when he gives that budget address on March 7th. Yeah. Well, Tom, look, we've had business leaders on the program who are very happy with Governor Shapiro. And remember, he's a Democrat, and they've praised his first weeks in office?
Yeah, sure. I think we've seen a couple different ways that he's already kind of addressed the business community. One of them was the executive order, where he was essentially saying we're going to try and cut red tape and get faster responses to businesses that need permits or certificates or what have you. And I think a lot of the business community leaders around the state have said, we think that we can deal with this guy. We think that he's going to be more responsive to our needs, even if they don't necessarily traditionally seem like a Democratic priority.
He's been here, there, and everywhere in addition throughout. No, I'm saying that because he's a skillful politician. He understands what he needs to do to maintain support.
Yeah, and I think Shapiro has, like, he announced, at the same time that business leaders were praising him for his executive orders to try and maybe speed up the permitting process, he also went to Philadelphia and stood with some of those progressive lawmakers in the General Assembly and said, I'm not going to sign a death warrant as governor, continuing something that Governor Wolf did. And for a very pro-law enforcement Democrat to then come out and also be like, I think the death penalty is wrong and I'd like to see it abolished. Like, he's clearly trying to triangulate his positions and appeal to as many people as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point about his broad appeal.
Sure, and I think it'll be interesting to see in his upcoming budget address, his proposal to the legislature, what his priorities are, whether he's going to include some of those issues that Republicans would like to see addressed, or perhaps some concessions to them as he tries to get that first spending plan into law.
All right, thanks for the update. All right, coming up, we're going to talk about higher energy bills, what to do about that, and we'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
All right, we have an important topic. We're going to talk about energy bills, and they're going up and what you can do about it. And joining me to do that is Terry Fitzpatrick. He's the president of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. Terry, welcome.
Thank you, Terry.
I'll tell you, when I read the material that you sent me about higher heating bills, what to do about it, I really thought how important that is. Even though we're moving away from a relatively mild winter, we're going to get a big snow in March. That's my prediction. The good news about March snows, they don't last long, right? They go away more quickly.
That's right.
Higher energy bills, talk about that.
Yeah, energy bills are up and heating bills are up this winter. I mean, it's been tough. The biggest reason for that, Terry, is that wholesale electricity and natural gas prices tripled from early 2001 to the fall of 2022. And that led to higher utility bills for customers, because the energy portion of the bill makes up probably half of the bill. The others to pay for a variety of things, mostly the pipes and wires through which the the gas and the electricity is sent to your home. So because those wholesale prices went up, the bills went up.
So wholesale, and there are contracts, right? Wholesale contracts that relate to this?
Yes. Utilities, both electric and gas, have a legal obligation to buy energy supplies for their customers who don't buy from a competitive supplier. Now, customers always have that option. You can shop in Pennsylvania. You don't have to buy from the utility. Yeah. But for those who don't, the utilities have to go out and buy those. And they don't buy all of the power at one time either. They layer contracts over time. And the reason for that is to try to keep customers from seeing these really sudden swings, which sometimes happen in the wholesale market.
And the other point that is important to make is you say that you can do budget billing to even out your payments over the year. Explain that.
Yes. What they do is they'll do a projection of what the use is going to be in each month over the year, and then they will give you kind of a levelized charge. So it doesn't go up as much as it might when your usage is really high, but it'll be higher than it would be on those months like, say, maybe May or something where you're not using as much energy.
Sure. And that's one of the options to cope with the bills right now. Are they
Yes.
required to do that? Are they required to do that by the state? Or do they
Well,
just do that?
I don't think it's written into law, but all the utilities will offer that kind of option. It's part of their tariffs they file with the PUC.
Yeah, all right. Adjusting thermostats. That's new to me. Go ahead, explain that.
Well, if customers are looking for things they can do to cope with these higher prices, conserving energy is one of the big things that they can do. And there are simple tips for that. Things like adjusting your thermostat, maybe make sure that your house is weatherized, service your both your heating and your cooling systems. That's one of the big ones, because systems that aren't running very efficiently will definitely take a lot more energy.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I don't think a lot of people do, but it's available, and that is, I'll put it this way, shop around.
Well, that's correct. Yes, customers also have the opportunity to shop around. Now, this is a particularly good time to shop because utilities, like I said, they layer those contracts over time. That means their prices don't go up as quickly as the wholesale price might go up, but they also don't come down as quickly. Because, as you alluded to, we're having a warmer winter than normal. Wholesale energy prices are actually down. So suppliers can take advantage of that a little more easily than utilities can. So you may be able to see some savings in the market if customers go out there. And
you can also have contracts over a longer period of time. Is that helpful?
That's one of the options that competitive suppliers will offer you. There's trade-offs involved in that, Terry. Usually that price is going to be higher because it's kind of an insurance premium built in because you're locking in a price for a couple of years. But if that certainty is important to customers, that's something they can do.
All right. What is what you call, and I'll read it here, early termination fees?
Yes.
What's that?
Well, I think that's part of a theme I would emphasize to customers. If you're going to shop, be a careful consumer, because I think it's a commitment. You can't just look at a price once, make the switch, and then forget about it. And you need to pay some attention to the terms of the agreement you're entering into. Is it a short term, for example, 3 months, and then the price goes up? And whenever your contract with the supplier expires, you need to be careful to really exercise your options at the end of that, because if you don't, you're likely to be kicked onto a rate that can vary from month to month, depending what's going on in the wholesale market. That can really lead to customers being surprised by some very high charges.
All right, we're going to run to a break. All right, what could possibly happen? Energy issues before the legislature and Governor Shapiro. We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, Terry Fitzpatrick, there are a number of issues, energy issues, before the legislature, and obviously bills would then end up going to Governor Shapiro. So what's the most high-profile energy issue right now before the legislature and the governor?
I would say, Terry, that's probably the RGGI issue. RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative.
Right.
It's a rulemaking that the Wolf administration passed. It's a cap-and-trade program for emissions from power plants. Very controversial in the legislature. The Republicans in the legislature hated it. Environmental groups support it. But now the question is, what's Governor Shapiro going to do with that now that he's in office? Because he was non-committal on it in his campaign. I think he has a work group that's going to make a recommendation to him. And, that's a big thing in terms of how he gets along with Republicans. Can he do something with RGGI that, does not further inflame partisan tensions with Republicans?
He didn't talk about that. Did he talk about that during the campaign? I don't think so.
He talked about it and said he wanted to listen to people. He wanted to look at all sides.
But he had no plan himself, right?
He didn't say he was either for it or against it. So we'll see. That's a very important issue because Republicans are still trying to block that. And it's in the courts. The legality of RGGI is in the courts. It'll eventually be up to the PA Supreme Court.
Now, a lot of progressive Democrats, want to end natural gas production in the state. Governor Wolf, a progressive, and Governor Shapiro now understand the significance of it. I'm not saying they don't want to tax it. I'm not saying they don't want regulations and some control of it. But overall, they're not opposed to it, it seems to me. Now, you correct me if I'm wrong about that.
No, I think that's right, Terry. I think the political environment in Pennsylvania is such that everyone has to say that they are in favor of natural gas, subject to the qualifications that you said. It needs to be regulated. I mean, even Senator Fetterman, I think, who had a record maybe of not being in favor of the gas industry, just kept saying during his campaign that he supports hydraulic fracturing for natural gas.
I think, on it. Go ahead.
Yes. So, that everybody is saying that. And Governor Shapiro made clear during his campaign, he came right out and said, look, I'm an all of the above energy person. I support all these forms of energy.
Right. All right. Let's talk about energy choice.
Right. Yes. There's a bill before the legislature which we support that would say that municipalities can't ban or restrict the use of natural gas. If you look around the country, California, places like California, some of the New England states, you have this trend towards banning natural gas. If we're an all of the above energy state, there shouldn't be bans or restrictions on the use of natural gas. So that's something that we're supporting.
Yeah. Well, let's before I let you go, let's talk about energy production. I mean, Pennsylvania is a big energy state. I mean, back to the 19th century when we had coal, soft coal and hard coal, soft coal out in the southwestern part, hard coal up in the northeast in the Scranton area.
Where I come from.
Yeah, where you come from, yeah. And how is what's going on with production in general?
Production has been increasing the last couple of years, and that's just because of market conditions, more than anything. As we came out of, and that's the reason prices are high too in the wholesale markets. As we came out of the pandemic, the economy picked up. You have more demand for energy. Then you had the war in Ukraine. And that affected energy prices worldwide because Europe now, which was so reliant on Russia for natural gas, is having to get energy from other places. Germany built a plant to unload liquefied natural gas in a year. Nobody thought that could be done. We are sending liquefied natural gas to Germany. So the question is, do we have enough infrastructure in Pennsylvania, the pipelines, to get the gas, to move it around so that it can be turned into liquefied natural gas and sent to Europe?
Now, does that need state help and federal help in order to accomplish that?
Yeah, it's a complicated permitting process, and the federal government really is in charge of it. There's a state component of that as well. And of course, there are folks who would like to really bog that process down and stop it. I think that would be a really bad thing for us in terms of our economy if we can't continue to build that infrastructure, even as we try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, this is a big issue that's going to remain with us for a long period of time.
That's right.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, you stay well.